Hello and welcome to the Holistically Psyched podcast. I'm your host, Mariah, Choate, a nationally certified school psychologist turned stay-at-home mom who now has the freedom to share what school districts don't want you to know after spending over a decade in the field of education. My goal is to help you learn all you need to know about special education that districts often gatekeep. Each episode will dive into how commonly laws are blatantly broken and tips on leveraging special education law to support best practice for students and teachers alike. We'll also feature interviews with parents and educators who are navigating these challenges head-on, along with those who are making strides to improve this broken system. This channel is for you, parents of students with suspected or diagnosed disabilities who already have or might need individualized education plans or 504 plans. It's also for teachers, counselors, and fellow school psychologists who are feeling the strain of a system that often leaves us feeling burnt out and overwhelmed. So if you're ready to learn, advocate, and empower yourself, child, or students, you're in the right place. Let's get started. Hello, and welcome back to the Holistically Psyched podcast, where we share the unseen realities within our public school system. I'm your host, Mariah Choate, and today I want to pull back the curtain and have an honest conversation about something that's been bothering me for years: the tactics that some districts use to avoid providing quality services to students who need them most. Throughout my career, I've seen some seemingly unbelievable things when it comes to how districts handle special education, uninformed staff, and parents. This episode isn't about pointing fingers at specific people, schools, or districts. It's about exposing the systemic issues that harm our kids, overwhelm our teachers, and leave parents feeling powerless. If you're a parent, teacher, or advocate, I want you to walk away from this episode feeling informed and empowered to stand up for the rights of children in special education and even those who have learning needs but haven't been identified as needing an IEP just yet. Let's start with the basics. As I always remind listeners, special education is governed by federal laws like the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, which is what ensures that students with disabilities have access to what's called a free, appropriate public education, or FAPE. That's the key phrase: free, appropriate, public education. What does that even mean? It means every child with a disability, or even those who have not yet been identified, have the right to services and tailored supports to meet their individual needs. Not the district's budget, not what's convenient for administrators, but what's necessary for the child to learn and thrive. Schools are also required to provide services in the least restrictive environment, or LRE. This means that students should be educated with their non-disabled peers as much as possible while still receiving the support that they need. And finally, IDEA emphasizes that education plans need to be individualized, not a one-size-fits-all. That's why it's called an individualized education program, or IEP. But here's the problem. What's written in these laws doesn't always translate to what actually happens in schools. And that's what I want to dig into today: the gap between what's supposed to happen and what actually happens when districts decide to skirt the law. Now let's talk specifics. Over the years, I've seen districts use some shockingly common tactics to avoid their legal obligations under special education law. The first one is obviously delaying evaluations. This one frustrates me to no end. A teacher or parent raises concerns about a child and the district says, "Let's wait and see." Or worse, they've instructed the people put in those positions, like in an SST meeting, to tell every parent or every child the same thing: let's keep waiting. They tell you to try more interventions before moving forward with an evaluation, with absolutely no intention or plan of providing said interventions. Now, let me be clear. Waiting can absolutely be appropriate under response to intervention with a targeted plan for progress monitoring, but it often becomes a blatant stall tactic due to overwhelming caseloads. Under the law, schools have what's called a child find obligation. This means they're required to identify, locate, and evaluate any student who might have a disability, not even having a medical diagnosis yet. It's not optional. Another common tactic is misusing response to intervention, or RTI. RTI is supposed to be a framework for identifying and addressing student needs early, but some districts twist it into a gatekeeping tool. They'll say, "Oh, we can't evaluate your child until they go through all of these RTI steps." That is not how it works. RTI isn't meant to block evaluations. It's meant to complement them and actually empower that evaluation process. The best way to address these issues is to ensure progress monitoring and repeated meetings following a timeline to address specific concerns with the child. All right, next let's talk about terminology manipulation. This one can be so sneaky. Districts will use vague and overly technical language to confuse parents. For example, they might say, well, your child doesn't qualify for services because there's no significant educational impact. What does that even look like? What does that mean? Parents leave these meetings feeling totally defeated and unsure of what to do next, which is exactly what some districts, not all, count on. Then there's the issue of providing inadequate services. I've seen districts offer bare minimum accommodations and call it a day. Or they'll group kids with vastly different needs into the same service to save resources. Let me tell you, a generic solution is not an appropriate solution or an individualized one. And let's not forget the classic excuse, budget concerns. I've been in meetings where administrators openly say, well, we just don't have the resources for that. Here's the truth. Funding is not a valid reason to deny services, and case law backs this. But parents and teachers often just don't realize this. Districts use it as a shield, and there's a quick end to any pushback. Let me share a couple of real life scenarios to put this into perspective. There was a child I worked with. Let's call him Darren. Darren had clear signs of a specific learning disability, struggling with reading and writing, difficulties with oral instruction and auditory processing, falling behind his peers in those specific subjects, yet being on par with math. His teacher flagged these concerns, but the special education teacher and the school psychologist kept saying year after year that he didn't need an evaluation because his grades weren't failing necessarily. And let me pause here. When I say that districts are the ones responsible for this, they are absolutely the ones, as I've been in meetings myself, telling the school psychologist and informing the special education teacher, nope, we do it this way. And teachers and school psychologists just take their word for it and say, okay, sounds good, without ever having instruction on what special education law actually says or what best practice actually is. So for this particular parent, they waited 3 years for an evaluation based on this common misconception. A child does not need to be failing in order to qualify for special education services. It wasn't until his parent brought in an advocate that the district finally agreed to even evaluate him. Or take Sarah, a student with speech delays and noted repetitive behaviors within the school setting. The district insisted she only needed group therapy sessions with 10 other kids because that's how they did their speech, even though her evaluation clearly recommended a one-on-one service. Little did the family know her speech sessions weren't even being followed with fidelity, since her minutes were started as soon as she was being picked up from the classroom and quickly ended early, often due to behavioral difficulties. Her parents didn't know that they could push back, even though they had reasons for concerns that she was producing no meaningful progress and she was likely getting 5 minutes 2 times a week in a group setting for speech services. The district never told them that they had the right to request meaningful progress or the recommended services based on her evaluation results, not what was common practice within the school. These stories are unfortunately not unique. They're part of a pattern I've seen over and over again in multiple districts. So, how do we fight back against these tactics? Knowledge is power, and here are some practical steps that you can take. Parents, start by putting everything in writing. And when I say everything, I mean everything. If you want your child evaluated, make the request in writing. In the link below, you can find a free download of my written notice template. This triggers legal timelines that the district has to follow. Don't rely on verbal conversations solely. If you have a conversation, follow it up in writing in an email. Bring someone with you to meetings, whether that's parent-teacher conference or SST meetings or IEP meetings. Whether it's an advocate, a friend, or even another parent who's been through the process, having someone there to support you and even take notes for you or ask questions can make a huge difference. Ask questions. If someone says your child doesn't qualify, ask them to explain why in detail. Don't accept vague answers. Refer to episode 6 for specifics on what to ask in meetings, or look at the link below for my free cheat sheet titled Questions. For teachers, document everything. If you notice a student struggling, write down what you're seeing, what interventions you've tried, the outcomes, and the timeline of exactly what you are doing and when you started it. This documentation can be critical when advocating for evaluations or services. And finally, for parents, teachers, educators alike, Stay informed. Learn the basics of IDEA, FAPE, LRE, and I'd even say applicable case laws so you can confidently advocate for your students and families. Districts count on people not knowing their rights. Let's prove them wrong. If you are looking for step-by-step guidance with this, check out my IEP guide link below that includes all of this and more. Before we wrap up, I just want to say this. I know most people working in schools genuinely care about kids. The problem isn't the teachers or even most administrators. It's the system. The system is setting people up for failure. But the good news is we can push back. We can hold districts accountable and ensure every child gets the services that they truly deserve. We can push back and make sure that teachers are properly supported and informed. Thank you for spending this time with me today. If this episode resonated with you, share it with a parent, teacher, or advocate who needs to hear it. Together, we can make a difference. And if you're unsure about that, ask the parents and educators that I've already worked with. And if you want more resources, be sure to check out all the links below for both my free offers and paid options. Until next time, stay informed, stay empowered, and don't let anyone deter you from fighting for what's right. Thanks so much for joining me today. I would be so grateful if you could share this with anyone you can think of who works in education or happens to have a child with disabilities. If this was helpful for you, make sure to subscribe so you can hear some of the crazy and amazing stories of what is really going on behind the scenes in public education. Until next time, remember, in the famous words of Maya Angelou, each child belongs to all of us, and they bring us a tomorrow in direct relation to the responsibility we have shown to them.